We've got quite a few things on our agenda for tonight, so try and keep to schedule. It is Tuesday, November 28th. We have a quorum present, and we are certified and compliant with open meetings laws. We have public comment section, but I think probably just about everybody out there is going to be up at the podium at one point or another, right? No public comments? All right. Then in communications, we'll have one flip-flop in here. We have STI Holdings as the first run up and Water Street as the second, but let's flip them over because one of the STI individuals is stuck in traffic. So we'll just flip-flop those. There was a lot today. Dave, you know who's running there? Or are they just... Gary, are you running it, starting it out? All right.
I'll kick us off here.
Great.
A couple of months ago, the city received a TIF request for TIF assistance at 211 Water Street. The applicant is here tonight to make a summary presentation. When the TIF request was submitted, the Finance Committee and the City Council approved Ellers doing a financial analysis. Ellers has completed their analysis and has a recommendation. And the applicants would like to make a presentation to give an overview of their TIF request and the benefits to the city.
Tim, their PowerPoint is part of the packet, the amended packet.
Yeah, so I'll just run through the PowerPoint quick and then we can answer any questions. But the first couple slides are kind of our vision for the project, which is retrofitting the current underutilized industrial warehouse building into 18 multifamily units. If you go to the next slide, you'll kind of see what it looks like now compared to what we envision it will look like. I'll touch on it a bit more later, but we're going through the historic preservation tax credit process, which what that means is it's essentially tasked us with retrofitting this building back to what it was when it was built 100 years ago, when it was the Model A factory. So that's all the aluminum and window storefronts will reappear along Water Street. All the exposed brick will be re-exposed. All the windows openings will be re-exposed, and it'll essentially look like it did when it was the Model A factory. The interior then, again, we'll keep all the historic components that we can. The interior brick walls, the flooring, and then we'll add some modern amenities to make it, multifamily, Class A, very nice kitchens, bathrooms, etc. The reason for the TIF request, if you go a couple slides further, one more please. The reason for the TIF request is a combination of interest rates, construction costs, and lending parameters are all kind of working against developers right now. Construction costs are kind of at the highest that they've ever been. Interest rates are as high as they've been since the great financial crisis, and banks are facing a liquidity shortage, which is causing them to pull back on lending. As you'll see on the screen, I think the shortfall without any TIF to us is $750,000. Even with the approved TIF request, we're still about $300,000 short, but through a number of creative solutions paired with the TIF support, we think we can make the project work. So some of those creative solutions, as I mentioned, we're working through the historic preservation tax credit process. Justin and I are taking no development fee. We're deferring all of that as equity into the project. My dad is the current building owner. He will be deferring some of the purchase price back as equity. And then we also have a preferred equity partner lined up, given the amount of equity needed to make the project work. We're also out to about 6 to 7 banks and credit unions to ensure we get the kind of best in market financing terms on the construction loan. And then per a recommendation from Gary, we're also looking into some energy grants that may be available to us for the high efficiency energy items we're inputting into the building. On the building side of things, as I mentioned, we're keeping as many components of the current building as possible. That reduces cost of labor and new materials, the exterior brick, the concrete, wood, and tile flooring, exposed ceilings, interior walls, and then we're reusing all the openings for the windows and doors, which creates a lot less labor to reopen some of those into the brick. We're also working with a local general contractor and subcontractors, and Justin and I are working with them to value engineer the project as much as possible to keep costs down. These are other creative solutions that we have kind of ran the traps on that didn't work for our project for various reasons. C-PACE financing, it's currently a higher debt constant than construction loan financing, so that didn't make sense at this time. We looked into WIDA low-cost loan programs, Wisconsin Economic Development Grants, the Stoughton RDA revolving loan fund, and also at how we could either change the setup of what we currently did or add a third floor to the building, but for a variety of reasons, none of those worked to add value to the project. The benefits to the city are quite a few, especially on the economic side. Most importantly to us, we are taking an asset that is clearly underutilized, some would say an eyesore in the downtown, and we're bringing it up to a very unique multifamily asset that has a lot of historic charm and sustainability upgrades. It'll provide naturally affordable housing for 18 units and up to 25 to 30 tenants, increasing the city's tax base. The assessed value based on Eller's estimate was 9 times what it currently is. And then the current TIF request provides a lot of benefits as it gives the city 15% of incremental taxes for 20 years, and then thereafter 100% of the incremental taxes. The new TID also provides assistance to other downtown properties, and our 20-year payback allows for the last 7 years to utilize the full tax dollars from the TID for other projects. It also creates $85,000 in park fees and up to $150,000 in annual revenue to downtown businesses. This is just a chart that shows our current rent matrix compared to the Dane County monthly AMI rental limits that HUD puts out every year. As you guys can see, our rents are currently all below 60% of AMI, so Fannie, Freddie, HUD would all consider this low-income housing, naturally low-income housing. And this is just a chart that shows some of the economic benefits. The first two I touched on, the assessed value and the park fees, and then a chart on how we came up with the $150,000 per year to the downtown businesses. Sustainability, we're looking to bring new upgraded utilities to the project. We already met with our GC on how important the sustainability attributes were. They recommended using 3 separate dumpsters during demolition and construction to ensure proper recycling, reuse of materials, and waste removal. The project will feature low-flow toilet and bath fixtures, energy-efficient lighting and mechanical equipment, and also it'll feature in-unit bike racks, which we thought was kind of a neat concept to give tenants the availability to have a bike on site instead of relying on a vehicle. We're also, as I mentioned earlier, keeping as many existing components as possible to reduce new material use. And then just added this slide to, I'm sure I recognize many of you. Justin and I are born and raised here in Stoughton. My dad owns the current building there. It's more than just an economic project to us. We're very passionate about the downtown and seeing it succeed. So that's really the motivation behind why we're trying to get this accomplished. And that's what I got for you.
All right, anybody have any questions for the gentleman?
What is the parking situation for the tenants?
The building currently sits on the site. There's no real excess land for parking. We've discussed this in length with the city, and we are proposing to lease stalls in the surface lot.
Lisa?
Not a question, but just a comment. I'm thinking that you, I also serve on Landmarks, and I'm thinking you already came to visit Landmarks, and so you'll be working with them as well, correct?
We did, and then now that we're going down the historic preservation tax credit process, we have to reapply to Landmark because the scope changed. But generally, they're very happy about the historic preservation tax credit process, and it sounds like they're quite familiar with the consultant that we hired to help us through that.
Yeah.
When you say naturally affordable housing, I assume what you mean by that is that you're not going to use some kind of income qualification and rent restriction process, but why do you call it naturally affordable housing? How does it get to be that?
Yeah, you're correct. There's no income restrictions at the project, but based on the guidelines I laid out there, it's under 60% of the area median income. So the government agencies, HUD, Fannie, Freddie, they all consider that naturally low-income housing.
Based on the rents that you anticipate?
Correct, based on the rents compared to the AMI, the area median income.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you,
All right.
gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
STI, do you have your next, or your person? Did they get here?
He's not gonna, I'm just gonna call him really quick because he literally wasn't super far, so I'm anticipating he may be just running up.
I have about a 2-minute intro to this. I could start that.
Otherwise, we could probably stall with a few other things. Let's see. We could, but that one's got, we could have a closed session on that one, so. Oh, perfect, okay. We stalled long enough.
Gary's up.
Okay, I just want to set the table a little bit for this. As you know, Stoughton Trailers has made a TIF request. Ellers has been reviewing it. Staff and Ellers have been having conversations about the analysis and working with STA and MSA to get us to a point where we can start talking about it. And so it's a nice presentation. I can't read the screen. Yeah, so tonight we'll hear a presentation from STI about their TIF request. And then later in the evening, the agenda provides an opportunity to hear a presentation by Ellers of their analysis. And also the agenda provides for the council to discuss the applicant's request in closed session. And then the intent is to bring this back to council at the next meeting for action. Just to give the overview, if you want to go to the next slide, this proposed TIF request is highlighted as the yellow or gold color on the screen. That's the property that STI currently owns. The pink blob beneath that is the existing TID number 9 for Highway 51 West. And then there's an orange area off to the right is TID number 6 with the amended area. And that's where Emmy Roth's headquarters is currently located. So this map shows the whole north side of Stoughton and where the current action is regarding tax incremental financing. Next slide. So this project is comprised of 3 phases, as shown here. Phase 1 is that purple in the heart of it. It includes the construction of Stoughton Trailers headquarters, which will occur between 2024 and 2025. And that includes the initial streets to serve the development of the headquarters on the southern end of that purple blob. Some commercial and residential development to the south of those streets, the headquarters to the north, and also a very significant amount of stormwater facilities in that area. Phase 2 of the project is the green area around that, and that's comprised of primarily mixed-use development, a mix of single-family residential, multifamily residential, and commercial. The TIF request includes streets, sewer, water, lift station in this area, as well as some improvements to Highway 51, which are also marked on the map. And it's kind of hard to see, but the Highway 51 improvements go from County Highway B all the way down south to Roby Road, which is south of TID number 9. The cost of those improvements, well, the improvements include south of the STI TID, includes sidewalks on both sides of the road, and streetlight improvements, stormwater management for the road. The part north of TID number 9 includes an underpass. So the underpass will serve the STI development as well as the Highway 51 West development just to the south in TID number 9. And then the improvements, highway improvements to the north, then currently do not include sidewalks other than a short sidewalk to serve the underpass. So the cost of those street improvements are being allocated between the two TIF districts. So part of the presentation tonight you'll hear from Ellers. We'll talk about approaches to how that allocation will be made. And then the third phase of the project is west of Highway 51. We don't know too much about that at this point in time. It's not being included in the TIF analysis. We're not assuming any TIF revenue, and that area may even be in a different TIF district depending on how the timing goes. But we're looking at that not developing until 2028 and beyond at this point. So with that, I think I hit all the highlights, and so a number of these things will be coming up as we hear the presentations, both from STI and from Ellers.
May I share my screen from my computer, or what's the best way to share slides?
Certainly. Yeah, we can do it a couple different ways. You can plug it in here, and I can advance it for you, or you can email it to me, depending on how many slides you have.
I've got it on a flash drive, but if this works, if I can share screen, then...
He's actually logged into Zoom already.
Oh, sure. Then you should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
As long as, yeah.
Let's just see if that works.
Need a bigger podium.
Yeah, exactly.
We have another one.
One of those $19,000 ones?
Yeah.
Over there.
So I need to...
There's this.
All right.
People online, can you see and hear us okay? Yes.
All right. Apologies for being late. I'm Jason Valerius, planner and part of the development team with STI, Stoughton Trailers. So I'm going to hit again with my own slides, some of what Gary covered, and then go into some more detail on the finances. I'll be brief where there was overlap. First, just to give some context, this is the land that we're talking about, the project area on the east side of the highway. This is our focus right now, that 182 acres. We, I think a number of you were there for the public meeting at the school back in February, and through feedback at that event, we made some refinements to the vision for this property, which includes a mix of uses, multiple residential types, commercial, the headquarters site in the middle, and a fairly substantial community park in the middle. And there have been some tweaks that will kind of be visible as I go through this in terms of the exact layout of some of the pieces, but in general, it is as it's been since then in terms of the layout and the mix of uses and lots. Since then, we have added this land to the urban service area, both the east side here, the 182 acres, and the west side. And that was approved this summer through working through CARPC. As part of that process, we had to come up with some assumptions about what the uses would be on the west side. There isn't yet any actual development proposed on the west side, including the portion that's owned by STI, but we did have some assumptions for purposes of planning wastewater needs from that side. Since then, we have also done a land division. So as Gary's graphic had shown, in kind of isolating out the portion that is separated from the rest of the acreage, at the center of it is what's labeled here as Lot 1. That's what's set aside for the Stoughton Trailers headquarters. Around that Lot 1 is lands that are needed to install various stormwater improvements that are ultimately going to serve more than just this initial phase, but are needed for this phase as well. Lot 2 to the south isn't initially needed for the headquarters, but it is created by default because we have to extend both Greenbrier and Kingsland to be able to get to the headquarters to create these lots. And so Lot 2 is kind of leftover land there. This image is taken from the engineering plans that are currently in progress, have been reviewed, and we've been going back and forth with the city as those are being refined. And just to kind of give you a sense of what we need to touch on the land right now to make this work, we need to do a bunch of grading to extend these streets to the headquarters site and to build the stormwater ponds. So that's what needs to be touched to accomplish this. And we are also, at the same time, different folks working on different pieces of this, working on the design of the headquarters, both the building and the site, so that that's ready to go as soon as we have the land use and financial improvements, or agreements rather, for the land around the headquarters, such that there is a site here that can be improved rather. One of the first things that's going to happen when we're able to proceed is that we need to establish a route into the headquarters. And so I'm just kind of showing that that's one of the first things that would get built. Somewhere in the first part of 2024 is our target. That would go in kind of along the edge of the right-of-way and then on into the headquarters site, so that work can proceed with the headquarters in parallel to work on the public infrastructure improvements around it and between the existing streets and the headquarters. The result in terms of development that occurs and TIF increment and revenue that can be generated is the headquarters and a handful of single-family residential sites along Kingsland Road. That we had hoped that the phase one development was going to be a little bit larger, but this is what's served by gravity. The first phase doesn't include a lift station for wastewater. The headquarters site doesn't need it. It's among the higher points on the site, or will be through the construction process, and can be served by gravity. These are the other lots that can be served by gravity. So when we talk about phase one development and revenue generation and TIF increment potential, we're talking about these sites. The remainder of the project, this is phase two. And so when we get in a moment here to talking about the value numbers and some of the calculations around how the TIF could work, this is the phase two, and these are all of the other improvements that would be, we are considering part of phase two of the project. This is anticipated, that new value would be created It says 2026 to 2031. That's actually when we would be, we're projecting that we would be able to sell parcels, and there's some additional delay. In some cases, we're projecting that not every parcel is going to get built right away, but that we could at least get them sold, and there'll be a few more years in there for absorption all the way through to getting vertical construction on some of these sites. As noted, on the west side, there is that 30-odd acre chunk on the just north of Rutland Downtown Line Road, not yet scheduled, and really we need to be a little patient and see how development proceeds on the east side before we can safely move ahead with the west side. Otherwise, we're competing with ourselves. That said, we have to be somewhat flexible and look to see what the market does as things move forward. But as of right now, there's no schedule on either the improvements or the development on that side. So how does all this line then into overall project timing? We're wrapping up construction plans for the Phase 1 infrastructure right now, and we'll be getting them to the city in December. 2024 would see us getting through the various approval process, so getting those plans approved, the erosion control permit approved. Sometime in February, we're aiming for, looking for TIF creation, the municipal revenue obligation, approval of development agreement, letter of credit, to get us moving dirt in March. That's what we're aiming for, and if we can get some earthwork going in March, we're able to actually start construction on the headquarters in April. Meanwhile, we do need to start thinking about those residential lots that I referred to in Phase 1. Those need to be created. When we created the land division, the certified survey map to create the headquarters site, we are only creating the headquarters site. So to enable that other residential development within Phase 1 that's along that infrastructure we're building, we still need to divide those lots. So we would kick that off and get that approved starting in the spring, and a bit later in the year, turning to all of Phase 2, the entitlements, the land division, the zoning, working on that in later in the year next year. Infrastructure for Phase 1 would be done in the fall. The headquarters work would continue into the spring of 2025. By 2025, we'd be looking to be working on the first half, roughly, of infrastructure construction for Phase 2, including the lift station and some of the roads, and then in 2026, the balance of ponds and roads, et cetera, to have the infrastructure built out. So talking about money for a few minutes, there are some extraordinary costs, and the total costs that we see right now, as we've been continuing to collaborate with the city on sharing and refining estimates, is about $33.3 million for the entirety of the 182-acre project. That is in comparison to about $17.3 million in revenue, most of that coming from the sale of improved lots. So there's a fairly substantial gap there. And the reason for that gap, the biggest chunks of that are there are some wetlands and a bunch of stormwater management obligations because of the flatness of the site and the way it flows to an isolated water body without its own outlet. There are some fill needs, so there's a big chunk of money required to bring fill to the site because it is so flat. We have some challenges and need fill to make the site work. We need that sewer lift station, which has grown to a cost of $1.5 million. And as has been talked about quite a bit, there is a fairly substantial park, larger than it needs to be just to satisfy the minimum requirement of park dedication for the residential units that are proposed, with the vision of a community park that would serve a wider area than just the city and attract people to the city. I think is part of the vision for what that park could be. So all of that plays into the gap between the costs and the revenue. The answer to how we could close that gap and have this still make sense is through the use of TIF, specifically creating a new district for the purpose of enabling this development. to go through the costs and investment required for each of the phases. I described phase one, working from an assumption that the development could utilize 100% of the increment from that small phase one. We're looking at over the life of the project, if that piece, phase one, stands alone, STI would realize a loss of close to $1 million. So there'd be a negative return on investment for phase one as a standalone project because the infrastructure required to do that relative to the amount of development that it enables, especially where that lift station isn't included, means that it's kind of out of balance and it would result in a loss of about 1% of the investment. Phase two is everything else in terms of the construction, lift station, the streets, the ponds, the other development lots, the park. All that comes in phase two. In that phase, our assumption is an ask for 90% of the increment would come back to handle those costs. And we're looking at a return on that phase of about 13.6%. If you combine the two phases, the loss in the first phase, the stronger performance on the second phase, we're seeing about 9.3% return on the entirety of the project, which is not generous. It doesn't cover much risk as we look forward and don't really know how the lots are going to be absorbed over the next decade, but is at least strong enough for STI to say, yes, let's proceed with this process. A couple of challenges to make note of. One is that, as has been discussed, there's an underpass desired under the rebuilt highway for bike and pedestrian use, with a current estimated cost, excluding any additional for the unexpected. It's about $1.16 million that is needed, and we've been talking with staff about, all right, how is that going to be paid for? Our solution, our recommendation is that there will be enough revenue with phase two, with the 10% of increment available from phase two to cover that, and that we would recommend that the city bond for that and use the phase two revenue to cover it. We're also suggesting and recommending that the east side not be responsible for 100% of the cost of that improvement. And that ties then to the second challenge, which is there are several improvements that we're working on right now for this 182 acres that are sized and designed and priced to serve other lands on the west side of the highway. So that includes the bike ped overpass, which is serving both sides and arguably should be split equally, 50-50. Includes that lift station, which is serving a chunk of acreage, both STI land and land by others north of that on the west side, and also some land beyond those immediate parcels. And it includes, and this is probably a lesser cost compared to those, but some pipe upsizing with the assumption of development further to the west. Our proposed solution to that would be that there is a cost recovery mechanism put in place that addresses how the west side development can handle what has been put in place to enable west side development. And that could be a mix of solutions depending on what it's being used for, but TIF and sewer connection fees could be established by the city to be ready for how that cost is appropriately assigned. At staff suggestion, we've kind of looked back we came to you in June with an ask for TIF assistance and an application that had some numbers in it. And since then, we have been continuing to work on this. We're deeper into the design process. We've gotten feedback from city staff and the city's engineer on what certain things need to be provided and at what costs we need to assume. And so we've got in the left column our assumptions that we had in front of us in June, and in the center column, our assumptions currently in November. And so the total costs on the project have gone up a little bit, but multiple things have changed. So the infrastructure costs, including the amount of fill needed, the cost of the lift station, some of the assumptions about line of item material costs, et cetera, have gone up by several million. We adjusted my own mistake on how much the land was in there for. So we brought down the cost of the land a bit to reflect what STI actually paid. That one was on me. And at staff recommendation, we removed from the calculation park fees. So those park improvement fees would instead be assigned at the time of construction of residential units and would more directly hit builders and buyers of those units. On the revenue side, we had made some adjustment to the land sale projection that came down a little bit, so the gap increased from 14 million to 16.5 million, or a difference of 2.5 million. So the gap went up as compared to June. Meanwhile, the value also went up in the project, and most of that is, I think all of that actually is related to our assumption about the headquarters. As the design process went ahead, it is a more valuable building than we had originally assumed, and so that difference there from 139 million to 148 million is entirely, I think, about the headquarters and what the headquarters is going to cost and be valued. However, the increment generated dropped from 43.5 million to 38.2 million because your mill rate dropped. Because values across the rest of the city went up substantially, and the mill rate dropped accordingly to balance out for levy limit purposes. So as you've seen with any TIF discussions, I'm guessing that's a challenge with the performance of your TIF districts, or at least with new development in TIF districts and the assumptions therein. So the increment has dropped. From that 43 million that we felt the project could generate in increment back in June, we were projecting an ask of 80% of the increment. With these various changes, we are including in our calculations and ask 91.6% of the increment. And I'll give a little bit more detail to that in a moment. That the actual change in the amount of increment that we're expecting to be generated by the TID is very little different, 0.5% difference, 188,000 more here in November than it was in June. So what are we asking for tonight or in the next few weeks? The most important thing, because there's a clock here and a bunch of stuff that has to happen with Ellers doing work related to a TIF district creation, is we're asking for direction that happen, that Ellers be given the go-ahead to put that process in motion. We're asking that the development agreement proceed, and I think that may already be in the works, but would like to affirm that that's happening. We would like to see that cost-sharing mechanism or mechanisms be worked out. And so would like to see some agreement that would be the appropriate thing to do so that the city is in a place to be able to do that and assign the costs of improvements that serve the west side to the west side. And then finally, we would like to establish agreement on what we see as the core and probably the hardest part of the decision-making process here, which is how much money are we talking about, and to get a preliminary agreement on a term sheet that says from phase one, we would like 100% of the increment to serve the construction of the those improvements for phase one, and then for phase two, 90%. And if we can get that in place, the rest of the development agreement should be simplified, and we won't. And if this takes some time, by starting now, we'll be able to get that out of the way and not have that hold us up on the rest of the agreement. That's it. I can wait for questions or log off.
Anybody have any initial questions, Lisa?
Thanks. I had a few questions. So the first one's just a request that if we could get the presentation sent to us, that would be helpful. The one that you just shared. This may be a question for someone else, but I'm curious about, will there be additional jobs created? And if so, how many?
So we do have, and I don't have that number in front of me, we do have a projection that was in our original TIF application, a projection for the Stoughton Trailers employment on the site. Some of those would be new. I think a number of them would be just relocating from one site to the other within the city. So we'd have to get back to you on that. There are also a number of other commercial sites on the property along Highway 51, but we are acting as developer, not as site improver, and so we can't make any projections at this time about the employment there.
And then a couple other things, and again, I'm not sure if this is a question for someone else, but do you have the new application that we have for TIF asks about sustainability features, and I don't think your application was the newest one, so I am just wondering about sustainable sort of features that you have planned for the headquarters.
Yeah, there are some. I'll take a shot, and if anyone here from the STI team wants to weigh in, they could. But I think there are components in the process, both for photovoltaics, and I believe also for is there geothermal in the mix too, or is it just? Yeah, so that part is still in discussion, but photovoltaics and also electric car charging as part of the site improvements in the parking lot, I think, are the main features.
What was that first word? I'm not familiar.
Sorry, solar panels.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's a
Apologies.
definite or a maybe?
Right now it's a maybe.
Okay. And then the other question I had was about the wetlands. So from what I understand, you're building around those rather than on them. Is there a plan to incorporate that into any of the parkland? And I apologize, it might have been in a previous thing, but I, didn't see the packet ahead of
Yeah,
time.
so the majority of the wetlands are going to be maintained as is. So the biggest single chunk is sort of west central and is part of that overall green swath through the middle of the site, which is roughly 40% active use park and 60% open space that's a mix of wetland and stormwater ponds and trails through them. So those wetlands would be maintained. There are a few wetlands that are close to the headquarters that we are in the process of seeking Army Corps approval to be able to fill because they're not connected to anything. And all of it is tilled. If you look out there, nothing looks like wetlands. It's all tilled, but some of it has been identified as meeting the criteria, the DNR criteria for wetlands.
So you've had to work through DNR and environmental impact and all that sort of
Right.
thing? Okay.
Right.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Jason, you described both, a variety of costs that you are proposing the city participate in financing and look for a cost recovery from lands west of 51. My notes indicate you mentioned specifically the underpass, a lift station, and some wastewater piping upsizing.
Mm-hmm.
Let me start with what I think of as the Highway 51 improvements. These are things that are going to be done as part of the DOT work on Highway 51. That includes the underpass and some other things. I did understand you to say that part of the cost of those, part of that Highway 51 improvement cost you're anticipating would be financed through, I think you referred to Phase 2 increment from this development, is that correct?
Right.
All those Highway 51 improvements are included in that from your perspective, not just the underpass, but the other things that we know are part of that project in terms of amenities that have to be financed?
Yes, though I think that's maybe something that Rodney could help weigh in on too. We had some feedback this week about how that's, the scope of those improvements are in flux. Rodney, would you be willing to weigh in on that?
Yeah, so there's improvements to the intersection. There's going to be a roundabout that would be installed. There's sidewalk, there's lighting enhancements, there's some landscaping. But in addition to the underpass, there's connections to the underpass. And so those are the primary, the item you're referring to, are you referring to the sidewalk connection on the west side?
And this, yeah.
So I guess I would ask a question, how you would anticipate allocating those expenses to properties on the west side. Phase 3 is an STI property as well. So are you anticipating an assessment district or in some manner trying to allocate those by 40-acre tract, or how would you anticipate trying to incorporate those recovery costs to the west side?
And I would just add to that, do you have a proposed percentage breakdown? What percentage of those Highway 51 improvements would you anticipate being covered with the increment from Phase 1/Phase 2 of this development versus other sources?
So with regard to, there are some improvements needed for the intersection of Rutland Dunn / Greenbrier with Highway 51. That, some things that wouldn't otherwise be necessary, and so it'll all be roped into what is built as part of the DOT reconstruct process, but the cost for some lane expansion, lane improvement or in and around that roundabout is already built into I think it's the Phase 2, our Phase 2 construction estimate. So that piece is already cooked in.
100% of that, as what you're saying is you're expecting would be covered by Phase 2 increment?
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's already cooked into our construction cost. The other piece then is the underpass and any connecting sidewalks.
And some lighting and some other things that Rodney mentioned. I mean, there are other things. Rodney, can you sum up?
There were sidewalks, there was lighting, and the improvements to the Greenbrier intersection, and as well as the underpass and the connections to that, as well as the storm sewer connection to a regional pond.
I assume we're on the same page as to what those Highway 51 improvements are. Are we, or are you not sure that we are?
I think there's maybe just a little bit of uncertainty, but I don't think it matters because there's enough increment in the 10% to cover the west side of the east side, the improvements on the east side, or the 50% allocation of those improvements along the corridor.
And so which percentage of those improvements are you proposing would be covered by increment from the STI development, and what percent are you proposing would be covered by some other means?
So if we're talking about the east side would be responsible for 50% of those improvements.
So 50-50 split of the Highway 50 improvements is what you're proposing?
Right.
What about the lift station and the wastewater pipe upsizing?
That would be a usage projection based on what was submitted to as part of the urban service area extension. It's about a 70-30 split in terms of the source of the flows, or 70% comes from the east side and 30% comes from the west side.
So 70% BSTI development on the east side?
Yep.
30% from whatever's on the west side, including Phase 3 of STI?
Right.
Okay. Thanks, that was my questions.
All right, anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Well, just to piggyback on that, so I guess the timing of all that, the DOT project, I think as it currently sits, is scheduled for 2026. So trying to understand what the timetable is for Phase 2 and Phase 3, I think is somewhat important if we're gonna, for example, you suggested we take out bonds for that. We're gonna be paying, interest on that. The question is for how long? And what do you have built into your projections as far as development of Phase 2 and Phase 3?
I think that becomes a question for deeper analysis by the city on the 10% of increment that's generated in Phase 2. So whether that can be covered in 10 years, I couldn't tell you offhand, if that's kind of what you're asking.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand if there's going to be a risk to the city and the taxpayers on the money that we would potentially borrow to do the upgrades, not fully understanding when the increment will occur.
So the increment will occur as development occurs. Development for Phase 2 is projected to start occurring in 2026, and increment would be showing up 2 years later. So again, I can't quote for you year by year what that 10% value is of the total Phase 2 increment.
And I'm sorry, just back to, I don't think, part of the question that Rodney was asking was whether you have any specific methodology that you are proposing the city use for collecting dollars from lands on the west side. I think during your presentation you said the city might choose to use sewer connection fees. What I heard you say was you don't really care. You just want the city to find other ways to collect from lands on the west side.
It's not really within our control.
Understood.
And it may be multiple methods. I mean, you may incorporate it into the TIF district or into an amendment to the TIF district. Either a new district is created for the west side, or if the decision is to extend this new district in a couple of years to include that, that could be incorporated into the project plan. The mechanism by which those properties are sort of legally encumbered to be responsible for that is maybe a question mark. I don't know if that's really necessary, as long as it's if TIF is involved. On the wastewater side, it'd be some sort of council action to say these lands are responsible for this amount of fee to cover this cost.
In your analysis that you did to arrive at rate of return conclusions and so on that included assumptions about costs, did you then only include 70% of the cost of the lift station and the oversized wastewater piping when running those calculations? Did you then assume that 30% of those costs would be covered by the city?
So right now, 100% is in there. If we can get to this mechanism, we can pull that out. If the result of that is that it changes the percentage increment available to the city from the east side, I think that's certainly something that we would be open to, rather than having that effect simply drop to the bottom line of STI. We're certainly open to having discussion about the impact of that is that it changes the percentage increment available split between the development and the city.
So my follow-up would be, you mentioned a concept of trying to share some of the costs on the west side. So I think my question is probably to Rodney, is that something that we've done in the past, or something I'm not really familiar with, that we would upsize and do improvements that would serve another property? And that,
I don't know that the city has, in the recent past, used any mechanisms to recover such costs in future developments. There is some obligation to provide a certain size infrastructure up to the property line. I believe there's actually some statutes that outline developer reimbursement of of certain infrastructure if it's connected to within a certain period of time. So there might be some avenues that are already in place. If somebody connects to that infrastructure, I believe it's within 5 or 10 years. I'm not the attorney and we needed to look into it, but I've heard of something similar to that being used. So that might be a mechanism. I think Matt's question is a good one, trying to figure out what their thought process is about allocation of some of the lands on the west side, though recognizing that STI has Phase 3 as one of the principal, development areas on the west side that would be encumbered, if you will, by a future assessment of that 30% of upcharging.
Yeah, and I guess part of my concern is there could be an argument made by another developer that recently did some work that some of their upgrades may serve this property. And I don't know if I want to get in the middle of those conversations.
I don't know that you'd find that, I'm not the utility director, but I don't think you'd find those utility costs from 51 West truly benefiting this property other than the looped water main aspects of it, and that would be pretty standard infrastructure that would have to be run to the property line anyhow. So I don't think there would be that issue.
Okay, well, that's helpful. And I think if there is something in the state statute, I think we should, investigate that, because if there's already something there, I don't know if we need to, create policy if it already exists.
Well, I'll just say at a high level, in at least most of the projects I've worked on where we've got a development of this magnitude and the developer is needing to put in some perhaps oversized infrastructure to serve their development, when it comes to the question of who will carry costs and whether there'll be a recapture opportunity, for the most part, the municipality looks to the developer to carry those costs with the potential opportunity to recover some from other developers. But, you have to look carefully at how that would occur and when that would occur. Here, the proposal, I think, is for the city to take on some additional debt to cover part of those costs. There are going to be a lot of complicated questions that we're going to have to sort through, and we're going to have a discussion with Ellers before the night is through, and these ideas that we're hearing from the developer will certainly be part of the mix, and we at least understand what the proposal is now, and that's helpful. But then you all will have to decide, after hearing from everyone, all your consultants, and hearing from the developer and looking at different options, what you think the appropriate structure is. I don't think, and we're not going to get to that point now with Jason. We got to hear from your financial consultant as well.
Yeah, and I guess, based on the timeline, I want to make sure that we, try to honor that as much as we can. And obviously we have some decisions to make. So I think that part of the discussion needs to be, whether or not we can make those decisions and still adhere to the timeline that's being proposed. So at least if we are, they know that, and if we're not, they know that as well. I'm sure at this point they'd like to, bid it out and have contractors lined up anticipating a start date. But I want to make sure that we can be in a position where we can give them an accurate date, and if it's consistent with where they're at, that's great. If it's not, I think they just need to know that.
Yeah, I mean, the timeline, at least in terms of the decisions that the city needs to make and the feedback that they've been requesting from the city. So Finance Committee's going to have a discussion about this tonight. We're going to have a discussion with the council tonight, and then we're going to come back at the next meeting and have another discussion with council. And my expectation is that it is at that meeting, that next council meeting, when we would get a decision from the council about whether to authorize proceeding creating the new TIF district, and direction to staff regarding the term sheet that was referenced in terms of what the basic structure should look like, and authorization to proceed with the development agreement. And I do have a development agreement put together that is complete with the exception of dealing with these financial issues that we need direction on. I think everything else is pretty much ready to go. So once we get feedback from the council potentially at its next meeting, we should be pretty close to, I think we should be in a position to inform, let STI know at least what the city's perspective is on how these financial issues ought to be addressed. So that's what, December 12th, I can't remember. And then I would and then the STI will have to decide how to respond to that. But that's certainly within the timeline that's been outlined tonight in terms of, now, having it, if the council directs on December 12th, authorizes moving forward with creating a TIF district, I would expect it'll take about 3 months to get through that process and complete that process. And during that time, we can continue working with the developer on the development agreement. So I don't see, any impediment to operating pretty closely within the time frame that's been outlined tonight.
I do have a quickie answer on your question of, well, could the increment that the city is holding on to cover those costs? Just looking at my spreadsheet, the increment starts showing up from phase 2 in 2029, and if you look at what is projected to be generated from 2029 to 2036, so a 10-year note that ends in 2036, but obviously this is just kind of back of the napkin, but about 1.4 million is generated. So if we're talking about covering half of the improvements, I think the math on that probably works out. Needs a little more review, but I think that math does work out. Because we're looking at a cost for the underpass of 1.1 million. There's some other assorted sidewalk improvements. Roll it up to 2 million and then cut it in half, just as a hypothetical.
Nope, I was just looking to see where, if anybody had any other thoughts, questions on this, at least while Jason's up there.
And then you guys are going to come back at 7:30
Yes.
to do this again?
Yes.
All right, I guess we have no other questions, Jason, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so that, no other presentations, that loaded up our plate for all the other things that we need to discuss in here. And I think a lot of these are for sure going to be under closed sessions from state statute 19.85, Pren 1, Pren E. So unless anybody has any objection to it, I would entertain a motion to go into closed session. Dave?
Second.
Second by Ozzy. All right, we gotta roll this one. Mayor? Lisa?
Aye.
Ozzy?
Aye.
Greg? Dave? Ben?
Aye.
All right. Any opposed to that? All right, we will go into closed session. And get a drink of water.